So I'm gonna guess everyone watching this video knows what's up with KSP2 right now, in that we have no idea what's going on with KSP2 right now. The entire studio behind it has apparently been shut down by Take-Two Interactive, with multiple employees directly associated with KSP2's development announcing their departure from Intercept Games, and community manager Nerdy Mike added that he would be helping to steer the ship before leaving in June. So perhaps there's going to be a change of studio perhaps. Really, it's all guesswork right now. A whole lot of smoke and mirrors, which, you know, it's kind of like the entire development of KSP2 at this point. Now, us lowly YouTubers aren't privy to any information that the public doesn't know. Believe me, we've all tried our contacts and we're getting no information at all, so I don't have anything meaningful to share here. I could do a breakdown of this nightmare, go through the timeline and all that, but Shadowzone has already done a great video on this, so honestly, just go and watch that, link below. But one voice I thought you guys might find interesting is Felipe Falanghe's, also known as HarvesteR, who, if you don't know, was the creator of the original Kerbal Space Program, pitching the game to Squad, a studio that wasn't even in the game development business back in 2011, and it went on to sell millions of copies. And upon leaving early access 4 years after development began, it won PC Gamer's Best Simulation Game of 2015, as well as the Best Gameplay and Community Choice Awards at the 2015 Unity Awards. But I think I should probably let the man speak for himself now.
Wow, you make it sound like I knew what I was doing almost. Hello everybody, I'm Felipe, also known as HarvesteR, and yes, I guess KSP is mostly my own fault. I started working on it back in 2011. Squad was not a game studio, they were a marketing company that I started working there pretty much straight out of college. I basically found a job at this marketing agency that did like interactive marketing stuff, like installations. It was like, I guess, games adjacent in a way. Like there was like programming and 3D and like semi-interactive stuff involved. And for me, like having majored in game design in Latin America, like the game scene in Latin America is not exactly huge, much less back in 2010. So that was like about as much as I was expecting to find, like especially for a first job. So I took that up, but a few months afterwards, it became like very clear just how much I hate marketing, especially like the pace of it, like the way the projects just piled on and everything is for yesterday, like everything is rushed, and you just go from one crunch to the next. And it got to a point where I decided that I would rather be looking for a job again in games than to keep working on something that wasn't even what I wanted to do. So one day I just walked to the office to do just that, to say like, that's it, I'm leaving. I want to go work on games, I told them. And they had like 5 projects lined up still to do. And the company was really small. It was me, one other developer, and the rest of them were marketing people, like dealing with clients and stuff. So like to actually produce stuff, they were real short on manpower, so they really didn't want to let me go. And they said like, if you stick around with us for these next couple of projects, we'll let you do your game here. So that's what we did. And I pitched them the idea for KSP, which in its original pitch format was a much less ambitious game. Like I've told this story several times, but just in case, the initial pitch for KSP, the initial pitch for KSP was for a 2D game. Originally, it was even intended to be done in Flash, because remember 2011, and it was just gonna be about like putting together a rocket-like contraption made out of a bunch of parts, setting it off and seeing how high it could get before you eventually exploded. And you would have to manage like engine temperature and keep the throttle up and so on. And that was it. That was the pitch. And then I said, like, I've got a bunch of other ideas for things that this could evolve into after that. But this was like, the pitch was for the most minimum product that we could potentially do and still call it Kerbal Space Program. Even then, like, the idea was so small that they even said, like, if the plan is to then transition to a 3D version, why not just start with a 3D version already? And I said, well, okay, yeah, we can do that. And we started off with this, with a game already in the Unity engine, but it was meant to be like a 2.5D game. So you could go up and down, left, right, but there was no pitch input. So you couldn't just pitch forward. But the rest of the game was in 3D. The scenery, the camera motions, everything else that was already there. The only thing that kept you from being able to go into the third dimension was a physical constraint and the lack of pitch controls. So that's how it started for the first, I think, 5 sprints. We used to work in 3-week-long sprints when we started. By the end of the final updates on KSP, we were doing 6 weeks, I think, 2 months at a time. The update schedule got much longer because of I guess it's inevitable, but like during that first part of game development, it's wonderful because you can make decisions one day, and within the course of that day, you end up with an entirely different game, and it's kind of amazing, and everything is fast, and compile times are non-existent. It's wonderful, and I miss it sometimes. I don't get that anymore, even with KitHack. However much pains I try to maintain that, it eventually goes away when you have like a couple 100,000 lines of code and across several thousand files. Like, it takes time, and there's no way to get around that. But back then, like, this was mid 2011. It was one afternoon where I just decided on a whim, like, hey, if I move the throttle controls from W and S to Control and Shift, I can make those pitch up and down, and then I can do roll with Q and E, and if I do that, I can just remove the constraints and see what's in that other direction. And I did that just on a whim to see how it would feel like, and I didn't revert it back afterwards. It was lovely.
One thing I think would be quite nice to touch on was you said that you were looking at kind of what kind of concepts can we make and still have the game be called Kerbal Space Program. Do you want to tell us the origins of what a Kerbal is? What were the Kerbals? Yeah,
so Kerbals did not first exist as the little green frog-looking creatures. They existed first as little dolls made of tin foil, like really tiny, like smaller than a mini fig, like a Lego figure. We would strap them to real explosives, like firework rockets and stuff, because we were teenagers and this was like the fun thing to do. And we would get those and we would take them apart and strap like little wings and fins to them and try to construct like a spacecraft out of the fireworks. And we would strap the little tin foil men into their little duct tape cockpits. And we eventually started calling them Kerbals, and they wanted to get to space. And maybe some of them did. A lot of them ended up in a lot of pieces, especially before we learned that you need to take out the explosive bit of the fireworks. Like, it's possible to detach it, and then you're just left with the propulsion, like rocket part. The thing on top is the bit that explodes and goes bang. The first iterations of our spacecraft still had that fitted. Some of those early brave Kerbals didn't fare so well. Yeah, so that's how it got started, and this, like, it was just like a silly game we would play. This kind of evolved into an idea for a game. Right around the time, I guess, I was going into college, I studied game design. So this was always an idea that I had, like, of something that could potentially be a game, I guess. The game where you build rockets and try to not kill your astronauts. Yeah, so that's it was kind of automatic. Like, when the proposal, like the opportunity came in to make a game of my own, I said I want to make a game where you build rockets and try to not kill your astronauts. And I guess like that part like kind of played in my favor that Squad was not a game design studio, because this was not like any normal game. It was very weird in terms of game design. And I think that if it was like a more traditional game design studio, they would have shut me down almost immediately.
Is that foreshadowing?
Yeah. Sorry, you were quiet for a bit. I wasn't sure that you were still there.
No. I'm just letting you speak. Yeah.
No, yeah. So I wasn't sure that. I think that it was good that really nobody knew all that much about making games. back then. So I kind of got away with some stuff that probably would have been denied outright in a more traditional studio, because this type of game was there was a lot of unexplored territory. First thing that the other programmer guy who worked with me said when I kind of explained like what my ideas were, and that I wanted to have a game like where you eventually get to space and you could possibly make it into orbit, and I showed him like Orbiter, which was and still is the quintessential like space flight simulator.
Yes, definitely.
Super realistic, and it's got everything. And I showed him like how that worked and tried to explain like the orbits and stuff, and he was like, yeah, we should definitely not have that in our game. The assumption was that it would be too complicated, but I kind of like, I didn't know how that was gonna go. I kind of like, in the back of my mind, I wanted there to be realistic orbits and stuff. And I thought that like the challenge of going to orbit, like it's kind of like a really fun gameplay loop of just trying, just trying to launch, trying to not die in the process. And eventually you make it into orbit, and then you figure out that you still don't know what you're doing. And that's the core of it, right?
It's obviously interesting hearing the history of Kerbals and Kerbal Space Program. But I think a lot of the reason we're here to discuss today is because obviously there's this news, or rather lack of news, regarding the future for Kerbal Space Program 2. And I believe that, when I first had you on this channel to showcase KitHack Model Club last year, you mentioned you that hadn't actually ever been approached by anyone with regard to acting as a consultant or offering any input for KSP2. Is that true? How did you feel about that?
Yeah, quite true. Still haven't heard from anybody. And that's it's always kind of struck me as a bit weird. I don't know why. Like, it's not like an ego thing. I hope it doesn't come across like that. Like, it's not that I
Not at all.
Feel like they cheated me out of it. It's just that I, as the head of a studio myself, like, it just feels a bit weird that he would take on the IP for a game who's clearly had like a publicly known lead developer, and you wouldn't make any attempt to contact that person, like, who is probably like your best bet, like, for a source of information at the very least on like how the game operates and everything. So it's always felt like quite weird to me that nobody ever reached out, which it almost makes me think that there's been like some sort of pressure from somebody somewhere, I don't know, to prevent that from happening. It's the only way I can make sense of it in my head. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to speculate more than...
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't want to speculate on that, but yeah, it's very weird. I have a theory. I have a theory that when Take-Two bought the rights to Kerbal, I had already left about a year before. And all of this I know only from like things you kind of hear and pick up here and there. So none of it is really confirmed. My theory is that like I had already left, and a few months after I left, 8 other developers left. What I think that goes kind of unsaid a lot of the time is that me and those 8 other developers were the entire KSP team. There wasn't anybody else left that was part of the core team. So basically, when Take-Two bought the rights to Kerbal and they eventually hired Squad to continue doing updates and stuff, the team that was working there was pretty much completely all new. Like, they were all new to the project. I think that there was maybe one guy left over, and he wasn't like a major like participant of the team back then when we were all there. So there was like 1 or 2 guys left over who weren't in major like key roles, and those guys eventually became like leads because there wasn't anybody else. Like, that was the size of the gap that was left when everybody left. And I think that this was also partly how the whole purchasing of the IP actually happened, because from what I hear, it was only after they caught the news that all of the developers had left that Take-Two approached Squad to buy the IP, because they saw the opportunity. Because this was something that I remember very clearly when I was working there, that it was kind of universally accepted as fact that there was zero interest in selling the IP, and that was never going to happen. So I think that after everybody left, like, Take-Two saw the opportunity to move in, and I think at Squad, whoever was left there thought, like, well, okay, everybody's left anyway. So, but I think that that's kind of part of like the sequence of events, like that I'm trying to like piece together myself from like my outsider perspective, because I don't have an insider perspective on this at all. Like all I know is things that happened up until I left, and then like from what I heard from others. But yeah, why even then, like after 6-7 years of KSP2, like why nobody would have thought to reach out to the not just me, but like any of the original developers is strange. I don't really have an explanation for it.
Yeah, because you mentioned that the development time of KSP2. So I think a lot of people would like to hear your thoughts on, obviously KSP1 was developed from scratch to 1.0 release in 4 years by, and I mean this with the greatest respect here, amateur developers, backed by a company that didn't and still doesn't work in game development. KSP2 has had 7 years of development now. We're 4 years on from the initial full non-early access release date of 2020. So what do you think they were doing all this time? Why do you think KSP2's development has been so dragged out and delayed, and yet has still resulted in a product that falls quite short of its predecessor?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I mean, like, all I have is speculation, because
it's a question I struggle to think of answers for, but you would probably give a better...
I mean, it's all speculation, right? Necessary disclaimer, I don't have any more information on this. Like, I haven't seen how it was like. I can only imagine. But like looking at KSP with like the task of creating a sequel to it, and kind of starting to plan out like what that game production process was going to look like, and I can kind of imagine, it's like I can kind of get a sense of just how enormous of a project that can become when you start thinking about it like that. Because that's the thing, like KSP1, I think because of the amateuristic start, it evolved into what it eventually became. And that evolution was like a 5-6 year long process of working like very hard and trying to like do things kind of in emergency mode all the time. This is something that kind of I don't talk about too much, but like it was unbelievably stressful working in KSP. Everything was on fire all the time. If I looked away for a day, something would catch fire and I would have to rush in and fix it, or the build would be broken, or there would be community drama, or there would be something else that happened that would like require immediate attention. And that was kind of the way of things for pretty much the entire development process. Eventually, like it stabilized, and we, like the core team, kind of solidified into a really like cohesive group, and we worked really well together by the last year. By then, things were kind of flowing a bit more smoothly. The early days were rough, like because I think we didn't really know what we were doing. The first builds of KSP, I would just pack up manually into a zip file and just upload them into an FTP server by hand. And then to get like the next version, I would just do it again and update a little text file with the changes and keep that going. But with that, I learned in the hardest possible way the importance of keeping track of versions of software and keeping track of like an automation of like deployment, so you can just click a button and there's a set of scripts that builds the game, puts it into, well, it's not a zip file anymore, but like you upload it to Steam or whatever. All of that has to be automated, because you do that so many times that it's kind of impossible to not make mistakes if you're doing it by hand. I learned this the hard way. But this is kind of like this kind of process of like organically growing like this, although traumatic, and I definitely don't recommend it, I think kind of helped us out, like shield us from the enormity of the task that was KSP in its final form. It was basically like saying we didn't know it was going to be that hard, so we went and did it anyway, largely because we didn't know. I think that this is what people normally call beginner's luck. You're blissfully unaware of what awaits you, so you just go for it. And if you're stubborn enough, you maybe come out of it with something in the end. But looking back, like if you were to plan a game like KSP again from the top down, like thinking like this is what the game needs to have, it becomes a monumental project because you have to now figure out like the coding architecture for the whole thing. You have to figure out like tool chains and pipelines for your artists to produce stuff and then implement it into the game. And then your game designers are trying to like if you think about it in terms of like a more normal game development environment, it becomes very insane very fast. It becomes a massive project. So it doesn't actually surprise me that development for KSP2 was a lot slower, especially with a team that was so much larger. That's also part of another thing that I suspect might be the case. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but like I suspect that communicating the design vision for a game like KSP, like at least in my experience, was extremely difficult. It's not a very normal game, like take like a shooting game, like an FPS shooter. It's relatively conventional in a lot of ways. You can talk about it with like a well-established, I guess, vocabulary of things. Like you can have innovations here and there, like you can have like a different inventory system, or you can have a new like game dialogue tree mechanic or something like that. But things like character movement or level design or animations for NPCs and stuff like that, these things are kind of already well established in the games industry, and people to a large degree know what's expected of those things. For KSP, like all of that went out the window. The game started from this concept that was so different that there were no other games even similar to it. So it was very hard, at least in my experience, to communicate ideas for the game design and what things should do and why some things should be the way they were. Like I remember getting into a discussion one day with somebody because they started questioning like, why do Kerbals have courage and stupidity sliders as their personality traits? Shouldn't it be courage and intelligence? That way both progress bars go in the same direction, right? And I was like, well, you're saying it like if stupidity was a bad thing. Like, they didn't get that it was part of the joke, that there was this kind of like humor to it that had to be kept up forcefully, so to speak, because these things are very easy to let slide as you work on the game and you just go through tasks. Like, it's very easy to lose track of why you're doing certain things. I've been guilty of doing that myself, so it's not something that anyone is immune to, I think. But I think that with the larger team you have, the more difficult this gets, which is, I think, the reason why most enormous, like multi-$100 million production games you see are actually very conventional. Take something the size of GTA or Starfield or something like that. Like, character controls are pretty much exactly the same as in any other game of that genre. Vehicle controls kind of work the same way. So there's a lot of things that you can just kind of gloss over as like established knowledge and just focus on the things that you care about. In a game like KSP, like everything is, well, nothing is established knowledge. A larger team working in a game like KSP, it's a much more difficult undertaking, I think, because you have to now communicate this very unconventional game design to a much larger group of people. And the larger the group, the more difficult it is to communicate, and the more you have to just trust that people will understand what you meant without directly talking to them. In KSP, that was basically the opposite of my experience. I would only get people to understand if I could actually talk to them personally. So there was a limit to the size of the team that I thought was humanly possible to manage. So I don't know how large the KSP2 team was. I hear like about 50 people or so.
The number varies. Because I think they have like contractors in, so they could never give a hard and fast number. But
right.
Yeah, 50 sounds about in the ballpark that I've heard.
Yeah, that's 4 times as large as like the peak size of the KSP team, the KSP1 team, and even that I found like incredibly hard to manage. And so yeah, that in itself could be an explanation of why things went slowly. In the game development, like circles, like people know that putting more people into a project doesn't make it go faster. It's like saying 2 moms can make a baby in 4.5 months. It's just not how it works. I don't know if there was like some thinking about along the lines of like, we are this big professional team, we can certainly do a sequel to that game made by amateurs or something like that. I don't know if that was the case. That would be just speculation, but it's yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. It's I don't know if we'll ever know unless somebody with true inside information comes out.
I don't think we ever will either, but it's definitely interesting to hear it from a perspective such as yourself, who probably have a better insight than any of us, and the ones that have more insight, well, they're probably under some NDA anyway.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to just discuss is the Unity engine, because I've heard KSP2 going with Unity was, a lot of people have looked at that as negative. Now, I'm no game developer or coder or anything, so I don't really have that much of I can't really form an informed opinion on it. But do you think going with Unity for the sequel was a good move? Because, you know, again, I've read a lot of criticism towards the game developers for using the same engine as KSP1, different version obviously, but same general thing. And then instead they should have used either a different engine or just have built a completely custom one. So, you know, what are your thoughts? Was reusing Unity a mistake, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. I mean, that's, I think, one of the most frequently heard bits of like misinformation. I would say I see there's a lot of like little tropes that go around the community, and there's a lot of misinformation in those, and one of them is this kind of like vilification of the Unity engine as the source of all troubles. I wouldn't put it like that. There was never any problems that we had with the Unity engine itself that made development impossible in KSP1. And sure, like developing your own engine is possible, but then you're not only making a game, you're also making a game engine. Making your own game engine is a double-edged sword in many ways. Like, yes, you get like full control over everything, but you also get full responsibility over absolutely everything, and nothing comes built in. Like, you have to weigh the two, and there's a lot that the Unity engine does for you that you can just use and not have to worry about and just focus on the game. There wasn't anything in Unity itself, like, sure, there's stuff with Unity that makes me want to pull my hair out even today. Like, that's just how it goes. But this is true for any game engine. Things like the floating point precision issues that we ran into so much with KSP, like that would happen in any game engine, even if it's your own, because eventually the graphics card works in 32-bit values, which are the single precision ones that we have so much trouble with. Eventually, like, you can't escape that just by changing game engines. And even if you do, like, if you find a game engine that claims to support floating origin implementations, like out of the box, that arguably puts you in a more tricky situation, even, because now you've got the solution that's built into a black box, and you have to inherently trust it, and you don't have full access to how it works. So with KSP, like, our solutions to that were nice because we were in full control of them. So there wasn't anything that the game engine limited us from being able to do that we kept thinking like, oh my, like, if I had a better game engine or my own, this wouldn't be a problem. Like, or maybe it wouldn't have been a problem, but then we would have so many other problems that you would be in a similar situation with something else. So yeah, I don't think it was a mistake to choose Unity. I'm using Unity for KitHack as well. And yeah, it's a very valid choice, I think, for game development. I don't think that any problems that came out of KSP2 were caused by their choice of going with Unity. In fact, I think that if they had chosen to do a custom engine, it would probably have taken even longer, because they would have been like in these early stages of core development for much, much longer, just rebuilding the basic tools that you take for granted when you have a working engine that you can work on.
I think it might be funny to just touch on the way in which you found out about the closure of Intercept games and the presumed termination of meaningful onward development for KSP2, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was a weird day. I went on the KitHack Discord, actually, and I saw a comment about the KSP community being on fire. Then I opened YouTube, and there was you doing a live stream about the end of times or something like. You were bracing for like a meteor impact.
Well, this is when it first broke.
Almost.
So we assumed that we would be hearing something,
And
but we still
yeah,
heard anything.
like some type of confirmation,
They
right?
put a corporate.
Yeah, I don't know if there's gonna be any confirmation like that, because, like, to be honest, I don't know if it's if they've actually shut the whole project down, or if closing the office means something else subtly different. I don't know. Maybe there is still some amount of crew working on it.
So I think all of them are still there at the
maybe-
moment.
I don't know.
So I'm like yourself, us
Mhm.
lowly YouTubers don't get any information that the public doesn't get, but we do have contacts. So me and Shadowzone are in sort of frequent talks because we're reaching out to all the contacts that we have, and we haven't really got any sort of concrete response. But one thing I did think was quite interesting, one of the community managers for the game, Nerdy Mike, put a tweet out saying he was looking for work, but he added that he would be helping to steer the ship before leaving in June. So possible indication there's going to be a change of studios. I have messaged Nate Simpson, creative director of KSP2, and I've said, look, I know you're obviously going to be under some massive corporate NDA, so you can't really talk, but can you tell me anything? And all he was able to say was, I'm very much looking forward to talking when I can. Thanks for understanding. So, not overwhelmingly negative, comment, unlike the KSP2 Steam
Basically not
reviews
saying
right
anything.
now.
Yeah. So,
But I mean, obviously, this is kind of a sad day regardless, and obviously Kerbal was your baby. I mean, just how does how does this situation feel from your perspective, I guess?
I don't know. Like, that's I still haven't really processed it entirely yet. Like, it's just like, it feels very weird. Like, everything about KSP2 for me, like, is a very weird feeling because like you said, it's KSP was my baby that I had to leave behind at some point. And it's not that I wanted to leave it behind. It was just that it became undeniable that I had to. Like, everybody felt the same way, that there wasn't going to be another project at Squad after KSP. They weren't interested in building up like the studio into like a proper game development studio. There were no plans of making any other future games after KSP at Squad. So I and everybody else, like, we found ourselves in this situation where we were just starting out our game developer careers. We were immediately like going to be stuck in a dead end if we didn't do something. So that was like the hardest decision I ever had to make in my life, to decide to walk away like that, because it wasn't by choice. I was perfectly happy with working in KSP, and I would have gladly continued on working on multiple other games there if there was any interest in doing that, but there wasn't.
I mean, if we talk about like pretending hypothetically that didn't happen, the Squad said, yeah, let's just go, full
Right.
and fully into being the Kerbal guys. Do you think KSP2 was a necessary sequel? Like, do you think it was necessary to make?
I had ideas. I had an idea for. I actually pitched an idea for for a sequel game that I wanted to do.
Oh, perfect.
Back then, and this was in 2013, I think.
Oh wow! So we weren't even
I actually
in 1.0
have
yet.
a bit of concept art here
Oh my gosh!
that I made. I can show it probably.
If you pop it in the Discord,
let me send it to
I'll
you.
edit it so it's on screen
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the viewers.
So yeah, this was the concept drawing that I made. It was kind of like a prequel to KSP. It was gonna be Kerbal Aviation. That was what I pitched to them that I wanted to do next. It was gonna be like a game with Kerbals, but the idea was that it was kind of be like an early 20th century era discovering aviation type game, where, well, before Kerbals got to space, they had to learn how to fly, right? So it was gonna be like a spoof of the early like aviation era, kind of like KSP itself is a spoof of early like space age. It was going to be kind of like that same vibe, and I kind of presented this to them, but there was like zero interest in starting something new. It just kind of went quiet, like that never moved forward. They were just worried about like delivering like the next update and hitting some marketing beat that maybe was important at the time, but there was no long-term vision. There was no long-term vision for like what could be like outside of just that first game. So yeah, that's
So that's how.
well, I guess KitHack is kind of like my way of doing that again anyway, right? And
I mean, if anything,
I
KitHack
think
is
that
closer to the original Kerbals, right? Because it's models.
good point, actually.
Yeah, when you
I
do,
hadn't
like, little
thought
tin
about it
foil.
like that. It is
Oh,
models,
there we
yeah. And Kerbals were models too at the beginning. Huh. Wow. You give me something to think about. Holy crap.
Glad I could.
Okay. Yeah.
Just having a quick existential crisis on the call.
No, yeah, that was the idea that I pitched to them as like a prequel, right? My thinking back then was like the space game for Kerbals already exists. We should now like try and do other things with Kerbals, seeing like the most valuable thing we had really was the characters. I could imagine them doing all sorts of dangerous activities, and I could imagine a game about anything involves Kerbals and kind of lethal and tested mechanical contraptions. So I wanted to do all of those.
That was how you kind of envisioned Kerbal kind of moving forward. But if they said,
Pretty
no,
much.
it has to be Kerbal Space Program 2, would you think
Right,
that would
then,
be a necessary sequel? And if you were...
Yeah, there are ways to do like a Kerbal Space Program 2, I think, like addressing the things that the community wanted most, which were multiplayer and colonies and interstellar exploration and stuff. I think that starting from the idea that you first have to have feature parity with the original to then build those other features on top it's a very reckless thing to do, because it's like saying if I want to do a sequel to a game like Grand Theft Auto that's also set like in Vice City, I have to fully encapsulate that first game, all of the story, all of the characters, and then build outwards from that to expand it. So all of the work from the first has to be repeated so you can then add the new work on top of it. Like that's kind of like a very hard road to take. I would have started with like a different premise of a space game where you still have Kerbals and you still build stuff to get into space and stuff. But I would have started with colonies and doing that kind of thing that everybody wanted to see as like part of the core experience of the sequel. So maybe it would play a little bit differently. And I think that's a good thing, because it would play differently just enough that you're safe from being directly compared to the first one to that level where you have to have feature parity to be considered neutral, at least. And everything else is a defeat. Like that's making things so much more difficult for yourself, right? Like, because you're trying to improve on everything that the first one did and then add some more stuff, where people have always been just clamoring for more stuff, right? And that's like the last thing you're planning on adding. Like it's very difficult this way. I wouldn't have done it like that, to be honest. I mean, I'm saying this now with the benefit of 6 years of hindsight, and I had a lot of time to think about this. And this concept that I have for a space game only really like congealed in my head very recently. But I have ideas for a space game that would have all of these elements that everybody's always wanted, myself included, in KSP, in a way that like hopefully like kind of steers clear of the responsibility of having to first match the first one, because I think that's kind of like an impossible undertaking, right? It's kind of like saying like, here's a game that's had like almost 15 years by now of community driven content generation on top of it. You have to begin by matching that. It's kind of it's a similar situation to City Skylines right now. The amount of content that they had after 15 years working on that game, like it's clearly impossible to match with a new one. But yeah, for KSP2, what I would have done probably is start at the end, not at the beginnings. So, and then build backwards. But yeah, it wouldn't be easy, but at least it wouldn't be such a monumental undertaking as trying to feature match the first one and improve on it, then add some more stuff on top. Like that's that feels like a very much more difficult thing to do.
So obviously that's comparing how you would have approached, Intercept games or Star Theory's, original concept. But let's just pretend, the shut the studios down, but Take-Two still wants to make the game, and say they came to you and say, look, Felipe, we want you to work on the sequel. Would you say yes? I know this is never going to happen. This is a purely hypothetical question, but what would your response be if you were offered the chance to work on the Kerbal IP again?
Is a very tricky question indeed. I've thought about it a lot, and I mean, I would probably eventually agree. That's what I think, but not without like some serious soul searching first. I think because KSP 1 took a lot out of me. Like it was a very difficult thing to do. I learned a lot through the process, but like it was certainly not easy. And like sometimes I feel like if I went to work on something like KSP, like with Kerbals again, I would be just inviting back that same level of commitment and stress. And I really don't want to have that again. I don't know if that's the case, but like, so yeah, eventually I would probably say yes, but I would have to, I don't know, rethink how I work. I don't know what's gonna happen with KSP itself now, with the Kerbal IP. That to me I think is the real shame, is that it might just stay as it is, and like no new Kerbal games will come out. Like that would be kind of sad for me, because like Kerbals existed for me way before the game, and like they're still like my baby in that sense. And that part is like, it's difficult to see it hurt like that. Even if I'm not like involved in the project, it's still like it's not fun to see.
Is there anything about the approach that Intercept took with the development of KSP2 that you might disagree with, or might have some sort of comments to make about?
Well, I don't know. Like, I really don't want to like point fingers and say, I would not have done that, because like that's too easy. It's very easy to stand up on a soapbox and do that with the benefit of hindsight and external perspective. So it's I wouldn't do that. I do think that like when the first trailer came out, I was impressed at how ambitious it was. Honestly, like I was a bit like, oh wow, like I mean they probably can, if like this is like what a full-sized fully supported team can do. Like that must be amazing. And I fully expected they would deliver, because I had no reason to think otherwise. So I was impressed, but like now looking back, like you could say like the trailer was all full of promises, and I fully expected that they would happen back then. It's too easy to point fingers after the fact. I don't know if
No, I only asked just in case, you're the game developer with more insight than any of us into the development of the Kerbal IP. So just didn't know if you had any sort of interesting or unique perspectives. You sort of touched on how you would approach development of Intercept Games' concept for KSP2. It was in doing everything front to back. But if you were given like here's a blank slate, pitch KSP2, what would KSP2 look like if it were left entirely?
I am kind of holding on to an idea for something kind of like that. Already, I still want to get it made, but it's very early to talk about. I think this kind of thing is it's not something that you just go in with a plan and then you execute. It's the first thing you have to be ready for in planning a project this long is that your plans are guaranteed to fail, and they will have to change as you go. So I think having too much of a plan is maybe a hindrance in something like this. you have to have, I think, a general vision of what you want and be prepared to adapt it as things inevitably change around you. The game that I would pitch is, again, a much less ambitious game to begin with the potential for lots of scope creep. That's what I'm hoping to do after KitHack. If things go well, I'm hoping that KitHack does well enough to support future projects. There's all of these things, but I don't want to just like promise like a list of features. I don't think that's the wrong way to go about it. Yeah, I think that the game needs to have a premise first. There's like a fundamental premise of the game, and then the features come like on top of it. But it's kind of like KSP, right? The premise of it was already realized with the very earliest versions where there were Kerbals and spacecraft. The rest of it was features that built on top of it. That's what I would try to pitch like a sequel like this. It would probably not go very well. Like if there was a major publisher looking for a major game, like that would probably not be ambitious enough. But this is kind of like how I approach it. I think that like KSP was entirely developed under this mindset of like this update could very well be the last. The game needed to do the bare minimum to exist as KSP. So that kept on going under that mentality, like for pretty much the rest of the whole process. And I don't know, this is kind of like how I taught myself to think about games in a way. So I get a bit anxious when I think about like pitching an entire new game, because it's very easy to overpromise at this stage and like imagine all of these wonderful things that a game could have, but like the real challenge is in like figuring out like what's the smallest game you can make that looks like this idea.
So after the development of KitHack kind of is completed, potentially would you be looking at developing this untitled space game as your next project? That's my hope, at least. KitHack itself has been like, most of the development of KitHack has been done like under this mindset of like, these tools that I'm making for this game are potentially reusable in other games as well. So there's a lot of it that could be just re-implemented in a new project because they were made to be portable like that. Like these are like things like of all sorts of things like that games require, like input handling or the mod pipeline to load in custom content from outside, the tools to set up, like to build the game world, to build UI and stuff like that. Like all of these things were made to be reusable, so that when the time comes to make another game, like I don't have to start again from scratch, which was the case after KSP. And I think that that's kind of like trade-off, right, of working in KSP the way we did, was that none of the stuff from KSP was reusable like this, because it was all made under this kind of do or die mentality. None of it is generic enough to be really reused. So and also because of the terms of like working in a game under a company, you don't own any of the stuff you make. So I couldn't, even if the stuff in the KSP source code was reusable like that, I couldn't have. So for KitHack, I had to start again. For the next one, hopefully, the hope is that all of these tools, all of this effort that we put into like developing more reusable systems is going to pay off, and we're going to be able to like much more quickly build up the boring parts, at least, so that we can focus on the fun stuff as much as possible. I don't know if that's... We've been talking a lot about your old game, haven't we? But obviously you've just very, very recently released KitHack Model Club. I know I've made dedicated videos to it on this channel before, but for those who might not know, do you want to just quickly do a little elevator pitch for us as what your new game is? I'll probably put some gameplay on screen to just help assist you. But
So yeah, KitHack Model Club is, it's almost weird that you call it the new game, and I suppose it is in the sense of
Bolster. It's always going to be Bolster in our hearts, isn't
I've been working on it for 6 years now, so I've been working on it longer than I worked on KSP now. But I'm very happy to see it finally live in early access, and I'm very happy to see how the reviews and the reception is going. Like this has been like that was my biggest like the source of my nightmares at night was torrent of negative reviews coming in, and I'm very happy to see that's not the case. So yeah, sorry, the elevator pitch is so KitHack Model Club is a simulator sandbox type game. If you've played KSP, you might be quite familiar with how it generally goes. You build vehicles of all sorts of any description out of a collection of parts, and then you take them out to see how poorly they actually behave in flight or on the road or on the water, because KitHack is not just a flight simulator like Balsa was. It's a vehicle simulator of all sorts of vehicles. If it moves and or makes noise, you should be able to build it. That's the idea. And then you can do this in multiplayer and show off your creations to your friends so they can also laugh at you. Then you can also take on missions. We've got a full like scenario editor in the game that lets everybody make missions as well. Missions can be anything, like from like stunts or racing or combat even. Like you can put weapons on your vehicles and shoot other people with it, like you've done to me on the last couple of times.
I feel the second time we just were both equally bad at building rockets and things. But
yeah, the rockets are there too.
Yeah, obviously it's released into early access, but it's in a very complete state. Like, you know, unlike another game, like it's got, you know, multiplayer is pretty much working. Well, it is working, isn't it? There's missions.
Yeah. So yeah, multiplayer is working.
No colonies though. So a bit disappointing there, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's no colonies.
I said there's no colonies.
But
there's no Interstellar. I mean, come on, what have you been doing?
I mean, if you go high enough, you can see stars. But like, I'm not sure if it has ever happened that a model scale vehicle has ever made it into interstellar space.
What is Voyager if not a remotely controlled model spacecraft?
Right? That's actually a surprisingly fascinating way of looking at it.
It's been an interesting talk. It's really interesting to hear your developer insights, not just from the perspective of a game developer, but also the game developer that created Kerbal as a concept and the original Kerbal Space Program. And yeah, it's been interesting to kind of watch this this bonfire like burn in front of us.
It's certainly been interesting. I don't know what's going to come out of it. We can just watch and wait, I guess.